The gospel lesson for today is from St. Luke's Gospel, the 18th chapter, beginning at the 9th verse. Jesus told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. Here ends the gospel. We join together. We all remember things that our parents said, the way they said them, their attitudes about a lot of things. And one thing my mother always reacted to was someone that she thought was getting a little too big for their britches. Someone who was putting on airs, someone who thought they were better, and she had a lot of examples of that to talk about all the time. My aunts and uncles were the keeping up with the Joneses generation, probably to a great extent good examples of a bad example. So if somebody in the family got a new television, then all of a sudden everybody got a new television. And it was the same with everything else. They didn't want any of the other brothers and sisters to get ahead of them in any way. So my mother, I heard her often say, who does she think she is? Or, does he think he's better than we are? Better, smarter, quicker, more gifted? That's a problem for all of us. We don't like the kinds of folks who try to raise themselves up above everyone else. There was a funny story told about something that happened in an airport. The Los Angeles Times carried the story. A flight was canceled, which resulted in a long line of travelers trying to get booked on another flight. And one man in the line grew suddenly impatient with the slow-moving line. So he suddenly pushed his way to the front and angrily demanded a first-class ticket on the next available flight. I'm sorry, said the ticket agent, but I'll have to first take care of the people who are ahead of you in line. The irate man then pounded his fist on the ticket counter saying, do you have any idea who I am? Whereupon the ticket agent picked up the public address microphone and said, attention please. There is a gentleman at the ticket counter who does not know who he is. If there is anyone in the airport who can identify him, please come to the counter. Hearing this, the man retreated, and the people waiting in line burst into applause. These are the kind of things we'd like to see, right? Very funny. I would have liked to have been there to see that. It's kind of like what Jesus said about the parable today, you know, the tax collector and the Pharisee. But I don't think Jesus told this story in order to get a laugh, because this is a very serious issue. There are implications when someone is so overcome with themselves that they devalue everyone else, what everyone else thinks, knows, can contribute. I think of a story in U.S. history of this kind of situation, very serious implications. It's about the Korean War. David Halberstam, who has since died, published his last book about the Korean War. And he talks about MacArthur in that war. Now, some of you have memories of the situations there, but MacArthur had some very early successes in the Korean War. And of course, many thought that MacArthur was, in fact, America's greatest general. But nobody believed it any more than MacArthur himself, that he was, in fact, the general of choice. And early on in the war, they actually captured Pyongyang, which was the North Korean capital. And MacArthur was making all kinds of statements about how quickly this war was going to come to an end and how quickly he was going to be the person who brought the North Koreans to their knees. And early on, this was in October of 1950, they were so optimistic that Bob Hope even came to the North Korean capital to do a show. So everybody thought, this is a piece of cake. Now, some people were saying that maybe the Chinese were going to come into this war. But MacArthur said, if they come into this war, this will be the biggest military slaughter in the history of humankind. We will just wipe them out. He really believed that. Now, there were lots of intelligence reports coming to them, and we're familiar with intelligence reports. We heard a lot about it before Iraq. There were lots of intelligence reports coming to MacArthur about infiltration of Chinese and other soldiers coming across that border. But of course, MacArthur didn't believe it. And he thought if they did, MacArthur believed all Asians were kind of childlike, easily led, and not very resolute people unless their leaders were with them. And so he had a man named Willoughby who was his senior intelligence estimates. And when those intelligence reports would come to Willoughby, the head man, about Chinese forces amassing north of the border, he would say, probably this is just something you should forget about. Because he was making those statements because he knew that MacArthur didn't believe it. So when Chairman Mao, who is the head of China, asked one of his advisors about the leadership of the American army and what they were up against in North Korea, he was told about MacArthur's character, not his strategy. And Chairman Mao said, when told how arrogant MacArthur was, "Fine, the more arrogant and the more stubborn he is, the better. An arrogant enemy," he added, "is easy to defeat." At any rate, the night of the big party of Bob Hope, the troops were going to move to a place called Unsan, which was north of the capital. And on October 25th, as our forces went up there to clean up what they thought was just a little problem, the Chinese came in a massive wave and overran the entire company of people. Many prisoners were taken, American prisoners. There were many casualties. And in fact, in time, they drove us back across the border and even took the capital in South Korea of Seoul. MacArthur, we are told, surrounded himself with men who would not disturb the dream world of self-worship in which he chose to live. And after the lost battle at Unsan, MacArthur's headquarters estimated, well, yes, there were some Chinese in the area. It looks like a few Chinese had snuck across the border. And they pushed their estimate up to, well, maybe there are 34,000. That's the maximum. There may be 34,000 Chinese soldiers in Korea. At that time, there were in excess of 250,000 Chinese, and the number was growing rapidly. And MacArthur at that time was still promising that the war would be over by Christmas of 1950. Well, as you all remember from your history lessons, 5 months later, MacArthur was over, because he had disregarded and in fact thought a very inferior person was Harry Truman, the President of the United States. Harry Truman was not so impressed with MacArthur as MacArthur was. This is a very serious implication for the Korean War. There were 36,900 casualties, American soldiers killed in Korea. There were 92,000 casualties, severely injured people who came back. And this is a painful story for us. We find it hard to believe that anyone in the leadership role with the experience and the training and the power at his disposal as an American general could be so stupid and so arrogant. And for those who lost people in this war, this book is going to bring back some very painful memories and maybe some understanding that they didn't have before.